Greetings, this is Elder Blacklight. I'm about to get into some deep psychological uh, warfare with you. When I took up Psychology 101 at Wayne County Community College, I had a sufficient instructor. She was black, and she taught us how to read into these types of books. Also, I had a instructor. He was an English instructor, but he taught us how to read into authors, read into their background and their history, and you can tell what kind of temperament they have and what type of approach they have to writing books. So we're going to read into the pandemic warfare that is upon us now.
It was shortly before noon when I arrived at Washington Airport. It had been a quick trip. Only a few hours before, I had left the university campus. And now here I was, ready for the Chemical Corps assignment I had been called down to Washington for. I knew very little about the assignment, except that it was top secret. Of course, I was aware the Army Chemical Corps works closely with scientists in the industrial and academic worlds. So I could guess it had something to do with my being a professor of biochemistry. But beyond that, I would just have to wait and see. The colonel who met me at the airport told me the first order of business would be a meeting with the chief chemical officer, United States Army. Then a short orientation survey of some of the key installations before getting down to work. I was glad to have an orientation because, well, in my mind, I had two questions about the work of the Chemical Corps. Questions I know a lot of people have. Questions that have to be faced up to and answered. The first question, with the development of modern atomic warfare, was there any real need for this sort of thing? After all, were CBR weapons in the same league, so to speak, as the nuclear bomb? And the second big reservation bothering me was the impression I had about this kind of warfare as something cruel and uncivilized. Was it even morally debased?
Now, right away, when you got the Army involved with chemistry and anything to do with science, you know that it's going to be weaponized and used as a war weapon. Against who, though?
Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge, the coming administration, in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
Now, they say that the coronavirus is married to the HIV virus. This is another presentation by Dr. Fucci.
Very much. It's really a great pleasure to be here for a number of reasons. One, it's a privilege to be part of this inauguration of the Einstein-Rockefeller-Cooney CFAR, but also to see so many old friends that I've known over the years. Particular shout out to Harris Goldstein, who came into my laboratory in 1983 as a fellow. I knew that I was going to lose him, even though I wanted to keep him at the NIH, because in the mid-'80s, he and I and my wife ran the New York Marathon together. And as we were running, he was running through the streets of New York saying, "I'm sorry, Tony, I got to come back here." So I knew that was it. Anyway, it's great to be here. I'm going to talk to you about this subject matter that has been alluded to a few times already, and certainly discussed in the meeting that I had with some of you just a short while ago, and that is the issue of ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic and pandemic, actually. And the title that I've chosen is Follow the Science. I get a little bit anxious when I talk about this subject, particularly when I talk about it to the Congress of the United States, because whenever you talk about ending something, there's always the assumption, well, we're already there, we've done it, let's move on to something else. So I have to throw that big caveat in. When I talk about ending the epidemic, what I'm talking about is following the science to get us to where we are right now, but also the need to not only follow, but to implement the science to get us to where we need to be, and the end game of that is shown on this slide. So I have a particularly personal feeling about this, because we often talk about things that happened in our lives that we remember exactly where we were when they happened. I think many of us remember where we were when JFK was assassinated. I actually was in my microbiology.
Communities around the globe. Here at home, Asian Americans are facing more than just the fear of contracting the virus. They say that hurtful and misleading language from our nation's leaders are now making things worse. Our Kira Phillips first brought this up in a story last week, and she now has this follow-up.
As Asian Americans continue to share stories of violence and discrimination, messaging from some of our politicians not making it any easier. From the Secretary of State.
Before I address the efforts that we've been engaged in to push back against the Chinese virus.
To members of Congress.
The culture where people eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that.
So there's always someone else as the monster. Everybody else is the axis of evil, or they the ones that's jacked up. And the majority, you see, the majority of white people want to believe that. And they always attacking people of color. So you got to go all the way back to the caves. If this didn't happen back then, the way the caveman was living and eating back then, he didn't know how to cook his food, and he was eating animals. Well, he would be distinct by now. So he developing these viruses, which comes from him mating with sheep, mating with dogs. He's causing these viruses. Now he's using them as weapons. He used them against the Indians, syphilis against the black man. So we demand reparations for the war crimes. It's time for us to fight back. Black light.